afternoon again. By my clock, it is 12:30 and we are going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Society for Health Communication Level Up Learning Series webinar. The webinar today is on the state of social media, breaking through in a modern social feed. We are really honored, very honored to welcome today experts and our esteemed colleagues from M Booth Health to talk with us. So we can go ahead to the next slide. I'm going to start with, before we get started, and I get the honor of introducing you to our speakers, I want to tell you a little bit about the Society for Health Communication. We are a member-driven organization bridging the gap between public health, healthcare, digital health, academia, and research. We are a united community, and I stress that. Those words are very purposeful, that we are a united community bringing a unified voice to shape and advance the field of health communication, research, and practice. We are an international organization, and we are based in the United States, serving members from all countries. We have seen at our national summit, if any of you have joined us at the national summit, we have folks that come from all over the country, from Hawaii, and I think we've actually also had some international folks as well. We were founded in 2016, and as you see on the slide, to unify the field across industries behind one singular vision to help advance our field of health communication. Our mission is stated here on the slide, so I'm not going to read it out loud to you, but I will read out loud that we are now 5,500 plus members, individual members strong. We have 30 organizational members across sectors and disciplines. Our leadership team that is shown here below, you can see all of us, and this year now we are also joined by a new addition to our leadership team, a new place on the leadership team, which is the past president. So we are joined by President Grilla on the leadership team. We also have an extremely strong steering committee and advisory board that helps guide us and provide us expertise and steer us in the right direction as we proceed. I am going to go ahead and do some housekeeping before we move along. So next slide, please. Thank you. Webinar housekeeping. All attendees, you're automatically muted. The session is being recorded and will be available on our website in the coming weeks. There are past webinars that are available on the website as well. The chat function I can see is popping and all over, and I see lots of things coming in. It is open for discussion and for us to connect and become that unified group that we want to and like to be. Please submit all questions for panelists through the Q&A function that you see. And also you can send a chat message, I'm going to get rid of this on my screen, to the host if you have technical issues. Press the CC icon in the bottom left corner to turn on closed captioning. For some of you, it may be in the bottom right corner. It is for me. So some it may be on the left, but if you want closed captioning, you can do that. Before I introduce our speakers, I do just want to acknowledge all of the people that are being affected by the storm, and in Florida in particular, and our hearts go out to them from the Society for Health Communication. We can go to the next slide, please. All right, I am going to do a little bit of reading to you about Stacy and Anisha. And I know you can see this as well on the Society website, and I know it was in your registration, but it's awfully nice to say these things out loud. So let me just give you a little bit about our two speakers. So Stacy Bernstein is the CEO of M Booth Health, a firm that combines specialized healthcare communications expertise with creative firepower of a consumer agency. Stacy is an award-winning and passionate executive leader, I can give testament to that, who brings innovation and creativity to her clients, operating in highly regulated environments, optimizing the convergence of digital and health communications to create meaningful solutions for global pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, health systems, and nonprofits, and the communities that they serve. Her work has earned recognition from multiple organizations and garnered her awards, including PR Week's 40 Under 40 list in 2015 and PR Week's Healthcare Influencer list in 2023. She is fluent in Spanish, which I am completely jealous of. I wish that I were as well, and earned her bachelor's degree in political science and communications from Tufts University. So welcome to Stacy, a fellow political scientist that now does health communication work. Anisha Patel. She's a senior vice president in public affairs at Booth Health. She leads strategic communications for the firm's public affairs and public health focused clients. Her expertise spans a range of stakeholder policy and scientific communication efforts for government, nonprofit, association, and private sector clients. She specializes in communication strategy, message and content development, executive leadership support, media relations, landscape analysis, and issues management. She does everything. Prior to Booth Health, she supported low-income families seeking housing services in Boston, and she provided comprehensive project management services for a fashion and lifestyle branding agency. I like that part. It's like a little splash of fashion in there as well. She's very passionate about her work that advances community health and health equity, which is extremely important for the Society for Health Communication. Part of our mandate is to advance health equity. And Anisha earned her bachelor's degree in communications from Boston College. With that, I get to stop talking and I'm going to give the stage to Anisha Patel. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashani, so much for that wonderful intro. And thank you all to everyone who's tuned in today for this webinar. We are really excited that you've taken some time out of your day to be with us while we talk about the state of social media today and share some thoughts and insights from our work and experience as career health communicators. Before we dive in, I just want to say a little bit more about us here at Booth Health. So we are, as Ashani mentioned, a strategic health communications firm specializing in issue-oriented health and medical communications. So our expertise spans the breadth of really a lot of organizations and companies that influence health today, and that so many of you on today's call represent. So government health agencies, nonprofits, professional associations, global multilateral organizations, academia, biotech, pharma, hospitals, healthcare systems, and payers. And so I think, as you'll see in our presentation today, we really draw on a lot of those unique perspectives and insights to inform our communications approach, regardless of the topic or audience in question. So today we're really excited to spend some time digging into first the landscape of social media and its constantly evolving and changing playbook, but also to share some principles for making your social content breakthrough in today's very saturated social environment. I just want to acknowledge up front that social media and health can also feel like a really complicated space for our communicators. It is overwhelming to navigate some of the realities of constantly changing social platforms, algorithms, and trends, and develop engaging content and get your message across accurately in short form without losing your audience to science, facts, and data, which of course are super important, but as we all know, it's not always what motivates action or behavior change. So a core principle that we just want to underscore that really should ground sort of all social efforts is just remembering that the people that we're trying to reach today, be they patients, providers, public health practitioners, or the general public, are also just real people with real interests and families and Taylor Swift playlists and vacation plans and all kinds of things that influence how they see the world. And in short, they're just humans, and reaching them effectively really requires that we reach out and get to them where they are in today's social world. So with that, I will hand it over to Stacy, who's going to help us understand that social landscape, share some core principles and best practices for breaking through, and hopefully leave us all inspired and eager to make our social content go farther in service of our audiences. And please feel free to enter your questions via the Q&A function as we go along. We'll address as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation. All right, Stacy, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Anisha, and thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully this will be a really nice departure from your day-to-day and sort of take us outside of that day-to-day thinking and inspiring us to think a little bit differently. So the plan for today, we're going to go on a wild journey. I also have been told many times I talk very fast, so there will be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. We're going to start with the blue sky and just talking about the state of social overall outside of healthcare. How is user behavior and channel sort of trends impacting how we engage online? And then I say a sharp left turn back to reality, just because I think we all know health has been a little bit slower to adapt to the state of social and the pace of change. And But we will look at some sort of areas of inspiration that we can take from the industry itself. So I want to start with a hot take, largely because I cannot have a presentation without a GIF. And my hot take is this, and that is that this is how we see the world. And I know that this looks very dark and dystopian and scary, and it's like, oh my God, we see the world through this big machine. But the answer is like kind of, sort of we do. And that is because many of us view the world through social media. Yet social media algorithms dictate what we see and what we don't see. And because of that, we have all been living in our own filter bubbles for a very long time, whether we know it or not. So when I open my social feed, what I see is happening throughout the day is very different than what each of you see. And so as communicators, our job has always been to try to break into those bubbles. But when you think about the changing social environment, that job is getting infinitely harder for a number of reasons. The first is that social is entertainment. So we've been talking about this for a long time. We're there in 2025. There will be more social network users than TV viewers. And so what that means for us is that people are going to social expecting to be entertained. And sometimes that can be in direct conflict with the messages that we need to share. At the same time, relevance is moving at warp speed. So we used to think of a trend that was sort of slow and steady and climbing, but it's not like that anymore. This is sharp increases in something trending. I'm sure many of you remember this guy. This is the Corn Kid. He went viral on August 4th. By August 26th, he was starring in a Chipotle commercial. So you can imagine like how fast that relevance is increasing, but relevance also decreases at warp speed. So who's heard of Demure? That trend went viral on August 2nd. I'm sure you're all sitting here thinking, I'm very tired of hearing very demure, very mindful. People were tired of it 2 weeks later. There was a huge pushback on social media about like, okay, it's been 2 weeks, enough of this, right? So we have to move really fast if we're going to be relevant on social. At the same time, platforms themselves are more decentralized than ever before. So when we think about social, we usually just think about these big five, right? But it is so much more than that. We have the ones that have been steadily growing for years. You know, Pinterest, not a lot of people talk about, but it's made a massive resurgence amongst Gen Z. Reddit is still hugely popular and very relevant. There's the new-ish kids on the block. Threads is the one that everyone was talking about. I believe it was a little over a year ago when it launched, and we saw this meteoric rise, and everyone was saying, okay, well, it's going to dip off, but it hasn't. It's really held steady. And then I say the ones with the Gen Z Riz. I have two nieces. They're 12 and 15. I wanted to show them I could use Riz in a presentation and convince them that I'm cool. They told me that I used the word completely incorrectly, but regardless, the Gen Z platforms that are huge, right? TikTok and Snapchat. But what's interesting about TikTok and important for us to remember, the fastest growing age demographic on TikTok is now people over the age of 35. So this is no longer just a Gen Z platform. So you have all these decentralized platforms, right? And that's hard, but it's getting even harder because we're also seeing the rise of what we call niche nets. And we see that in two different ways. There's the not so niche platforms like Reddit and Discord that let you get super niche. So you can talk about anything on these platforms, but the types of conversations and communities that people are coalescing around are really interesting and kind of crazy. On Discord, there are 25,000 strangers that play truth or dare with one another. My favorite Reddit example is Life of Norman. That's 75,000 people that tell stories about a fictional character named Norman and what he might be doing on any given day. So this is how niche the conversations online are getting, and people coalescing around these shared areas of interest. They're doing it on standalone apps as well. Goodreads originally was just a place to discover books. It's now 150 million people who can add each other as friends. They can send direct messages. They're engaging in conversations around their love of literature. Ravelry, there are 9 million yarn-loving friends just talking about their love of knitting. So again, areas of interest in people, not necessarily leaving big platforms, but finding other ways to find people that they can identify with in shared areas of interest. That means for us that great social has to be a lot less of just this. And that is just the story that we want to tell. And it's got to be more of this. It's got to be the story we want to tell intersecting with the topics that our audience already cares about. That's the content that's really going to win. That's how the Red Cross got young people to donate blood. They've been really good at intersecting with interests for a long time. And they used to do it, and they still do, but with big entertainment partnerships, right? Wonder Woman, Game of Thrones. But one of their most successful campaigns was what they did last year, where they tapped into a trend. Nostalgia was huge on TikTok. So they created a shirt featuring Snoopy. It said, "Be cool, give blood." They posted it on TikTok. It went viral immediately, and it increased blood donations by 40%. So you can see how just intersecting with a trend and interest makes content travel. It's also why Excedrin did this. Now, this is a relatively older example, but it's so smart. This was during the 2016 election, where Excedrin noticed, okay, there's a lot of talk and conversation. They did a quick and dirty study that showed that people are getting election-related headaches. So they created some smart social content about it, some smart media mailers, and sponsored the hashtag debate headache. It went wild. And hilariously, I think the debates were so awful that CNN declared Excedrin the winner of one of the debates. Now, speaking about elections, we know that we are deep in election season. There's been a ton of conversation around the impact of social media, particularly through the lens of, oh God, I have dogs that are barking now. I apologize. Particularly through the lens of artificial intelligence, misinformation, and disinformation. Guys, be quiet. I'm talking to a lot of people. I'm so sorry, guys. This is happening right now, right? So we are seeing this in real time. We saw the AI generated images of Taylor Swift, Iran trying to meddle in the election, the debates around, are these rally photos AI generated? The one on the bottom is really interesting. This was posted originally about Elon Musk and his misleading election claims and reaching millions. Those claims have now reached over 1.2 billion people. So there are dangers with social media, and unfortunately, the platforms are not helping. So after last year's election cycle, every major platform decided to shun its arbiter role. We know that Twitter got rid of most of its misinformation team. YouTube said it's no longer taking down false claims about US elections. They don't want to be in the business of correcting misinformation. They also don't want to be in the business of news. So Facebook and Meta at large made a decision where they said, look, this is too complicated. It's too messy. It's leading to crises. We're deprioritizing news. We are not a news engine. And that matters a lot because 50% of Americans get their news from social media and increasingly not from traditional sources. So let me give you an example of that. This is Jessica Yellin. She's a former reporter from CNN, ABC, MSNBC. She doesn't work here anymore. She works here. She started News Not Noise, and this is a social first news platform. And you might look at this and think, okay, well, that's probably pretty niche. It's not. She has 3 times as many followers as Axios. And I don't think that anyone in communications thinks Axios is niche. She's been covered in the Wall Street Journal and Glamour and Vogue. But remember when I said that Meta is deprioritizing news? If you follow Jessica Yellin, you will hear her talk about this. Her impressions went down by the millions immediately. So it is harder for people to get credible information than ever before. Now, the good news is that we're starting to see behavior shift from delivery to discovery. So we talked about algorithms, right? Determining our view of the world. But social is starting to become more of a search engine. People are finding the information that they're looking for themselves. And especially across some of these newer platforms, 25% of Americans say they use social for search. 67% of Gen Z use Instagram as a search engine. That number goes up with Gen Z and TikTok. And so that means that if people are looking for certain information, they can find that information, not just see what the algorithms are putting in their feed. The other good news is that more context is making a comeback. So we saw for a number of years a trend toward shorter, ephemeral content. In the last year alone, we've seen that flip. We've seen every single platform extend the length of content that you can upload to the platform. And so for us as health communicators, that means that users are starting to be more accustomed and open to getting context, right? Information with context and watching longer form content. I mentioned AI. AI is also not all bad. This is an example of a campaign from HHS. And if you go to the website, they've got amazing ads, videos, print advertisements, and you get to the social media toolkit, and this is it. It is 3 posts. But if you know anything about PrEP, you know that it is incredibly difficult to reach the audiences that need to be on PrEP and convince them to take PrEP, and that those audiences vary so significantly across race, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. So this content isn't going to do it. But when you're resource constrained and you can't create content for all of those audiences, what do? Well, AI allows us to go from 3 generic pieces of content to hundreds of hyper-targeted stories at scale. So that's a really compelling use case in health. And speaking of health, I want to talk about some of the shifts that we've seen specifically related to health behavior online. And we're going to start with some numbers. 2.5 billion views. That is of hashtag medical TikTok. So that's not wellness or beauty or skin cream. That is hashtag medical TikTok. 4.5 billion likes per month. That's Instagram's health content. 1 million posts about health on X every day. So it is undeniable that social media is a critical part of our health journey. And that's not necessarily new. Now, this example is so old at this point, but I refuse to stop presenting it because it's my favorite. In the early days of Reddit, there was a guy that woke up one day and decided it would be really fun to urinate on his girlfriend's pregnancy test. He did that. It showed that he was pregnant, and he made this cartoon about it and posted it on Reddit. There were hundreds of very inappropriate comments and jokes, but one person saw that and commented, "Hey, a man showing he's pregnant on a test could actually be an indication of testicular cancer. You should really go see your doctor." Sure enough, he went to his doctor and Reddit saved his life. He had cancer. So there's a lot of power in this, right? This was years ago. This is now supercharged. Over 80% of internet users are seeking health information on social. 91% of HCPs use social media for professional purposes. And so remember that Reddit example, that's now mainstream. Nearly 1 in 4 people have self-diagnosed themselves based on information they found on social media. And yes, as you would expect, the higher percentages are with the younger generations, but that's 15% of baby boomers. And what's so interesting is that 82% of those people who went to a doctor after self-diagnosing had their diagnosis confirmed. It's also really interesting to think about the level of trust and accessibility of digital and social. So when you ask Americans, who do you go to before you would go to a doctor? 65% of them say Google. That's probably not surprising. What is surprising and probably alarming is that 33% of Gen Z trust Google more than their doctors, but they also are trusting influencers more than their doctors. So 37% of Americans turn to influencers because they are seen as more accessible than a doctor, and 17% say they trust them more than their doctors. So influencers matter a lot. The creator economy is creeping into healthcare. Now, when we think about influencers, there's obviously the big ones, right? Dr. Knock is the one on the left. He is a PhD that dances while explaining complex medical concepts. He has close to 2 million followers. So there are big, influential people on TikTok, on Instagram, on various platforms that are telling health stories, but there are also micro influencers. This is a screenshot of a platform that consumer brands have been using for years, where they would go and say, I need to find a food influencer. And you type food in and you get hundreds of people that you can pay $100 to post about your brand. Well, you can now do that for mental health. You have no idea what their credentials are, but I could pay this person $75 to post something about mental health. What's really good about it is that micro influence matters a lot. So these are 6 of the most influential MS influencers on Instagram. And you can see that the most followers any of them have is 37,000. So these are not big names. They're not celebrities. They are credible people that are trusted by the community. And research has shown that micro influencers generate 60% higher engagement rates. They're 22% more likely to convert and 6 times more efficient than celebrities. So micro influence is critical in today's social world. But I mentioned there's a good thing about influencers and there's a bad thing. And that is what happens when influence gets into the wrong hands. We're seeing this in a major way in terms of teens, TikTok, and mental health. There have been a ton of media headlines. What I think is most interesting is an organization did a study. They took a random sample of 500 mental health posts on TikTok. 83% of them were misleading, 31% inaccurate, and 14% potentially damaging. And you can see the reach of these posts. This is not small. They are reaching tens of millions of people. What's even more alarming is that 91% of the advice came from people with zero qualifications. So it is very safe to say that it is a bit of the wild, wild west out there right now. And that begs the question for us as communicators, how do we break through in this environment? There are a few really critical ways, but they are all rooted in one principle, and that is that we have to earn attention in a modern social feed. We do not just get attention if we put up a post, we have to earn it. So how do you do that in today's environment? The first way is you've got to create content like your audience does. So I always say our job is to get people to stop moving their thumb. You've got to stop the scroll, right? They're looking at content in certain formats on certain trends that they are used to seeing. We have to create content in a way that is native to what they see in their feed. We have to intersect with their interests. Remember that circle that I showed you where it's the story we want to tell and it's the stuff they actually care about? We have got to find a way to make our health stories relevant to the things that they are already interested in and the content that they're already used to consuming on social. Let the influencers do the talking. And remember, again, this is not celebrities or, celebrities are fine. It's not just celebrities. This is micro influencers that can credibly deliver a health message to a niche audience that matters, that desperately needs that health information. And the last bit, and probably the hardest in health, is that we have to move at the speed of social. So remember, I showed the examples of relevance coming and going so fast. If we're going to earn attention in a feed, we have to be faster and we have to be relevant with those trends and the behaviors of the people that we're trying to reach. So you might be wondering, how do we do this in health and in public health in particular? I'm going to show you some principles in action. The one thing I'll say is that I pull out like the most wild, on a scale of mild to wild, I pull out the most wild, interesting, on-trend examples. But that's not to say that the only way to do this is to be wild. I want you to think about how your content just looks, the visuals of it, the language that you're using. There are simple things that we can do to be relevant, but I want to show you some really cool examples as well. The first, creating content like your audience does. The post on the left from This is Public Health. If you're not familiar with this guy, this is the dude with a sign. He's hilarious. A lot of people are used to, one, seeing him in their feed, but also seeing other people sort of hijacking his picture and using it usually to tell funny jokes. They used it to talk about mental health challenges. The post in the middle is from NAMI, where they're trying to talk about mental health benefits, but they do it through a POV lens, which is a format that is very native to social. And the one on the right is really interesting. This is Komen, where this is her telling her story about how she found out that she has cancer, but she did it through a Get Ready With Me, which is a super popular, very common format on TikTok. So she's talking about finding out that she had cancer while getting ready and doing her makeup. But again, this is the kind of content that your audience is used to seeing in feed. So it's a great way to intersect them with a health message. The next is intersecting with their interests. The example on the left is super creative. This is American Heart Association, where they were trying to educate people on hands-only CPR. So they took a number of really popular songs that had the right beats per minute to give you the right tempo for doing CPR. They posted this when Chappell Roan was on a meteoric rise, and so leveraging her Pink Pony Club song to do that. Think about how we would typically do that in healthcare. We would put up a very basic sort of informational post about how to do CPR. Maybe if we were lucky, we'd have an animation. This is a way to tap into their interests. Yale School of Public Health asked people which child or routine vaccination is your bestie, and they used fashion and sort of mood boards to kind of bring that to life. CDC has done a really great job of this recently. When the new season of Bridgerton came out and they wanted to post about allergies, they did it in the format of Lady Sniffleden's letters. That's from the show. I don't watch the show, but I've heard this is very on trend and relevant. And then the Arizona Department of Health, this is a really interesting one because you can imagine they have to post excessive heat warnings all the time. And it's really hard for them to stand out, right? And people not to just, see it and scroll past it. So they tapped into the summer trend of Barbenheimer. They put Barbie and Oppenheimer together and they used that as a vehicle to talk about a triple digit forecast. So again, you can see how we're intersecting with interests to deliver health messages. Letting the influencers do the talking. The two examples on the left are from California Department of Public Health, who was doing a campaign around dementia. But what's interesting about this is it's an example of micro and macro influence. So Dementia Darling on the left, micro influencer, has about 60,000 followers, but very credible, right? Her name is Dementia Darling. She talks about this issue all the time. And then they leverage Dr. Knock, that guy I showed you earlier that does dances and talks about health issues, who has 600,000 followers on Instagram. The two examples on the right are micro influence, but created in a way that's really native for social. So the example in the middle, this is a format you see all the time. Somebody talking on a green screen, it's native to people's feeds. And the example on the right is really compelling. This is a woman talking about self-harm and her journey with self-harm. But again, she's telling that story while she's painting, which is a really common way that people consume content. It's similar to that get ready with me trend. They're talking about things that they're doing and using it as a vehicle for conversation. The last one is moving at the speed of social. And there are some fun examples here. I don't know if you all are familiar with Moodeng. This animal went viral very recently. The health department in Vermont was able to tap into that trend. They pulled photos of Moodeng and used it to deliver health messages. During the Olympics, we saw some public health organizations doing a really good job of tapping into sort of those viral photos. You see the Asthma Foundation pulled that photo of Snoop and used it to talk about pursed lip breathing and how you could make that more effective for better breath control. The example on the right is really simple. ACS noticed in the summer, I'm sure you guys are aware of the Eras Tour, Taylor Swift. Cruel Summer, one of her songs, was an old song, but it suddenly reached #1. And so they used a cover image, How Not to Have a Cruel Summer, to be able to deliver summer messages around sunscreen and shade. So I know that was a lot of examples. The last thing that I'm going to say to you is that great social transcends. When CDC kind of in the beginning, when they started tapping into culture and common formats, they had put up this post, and this is another Taylor Swift riff, where when she came out with the Tortured Poets Department, every brand on earth created the look and feel of that album cover and used it to talk about their brand. Well, CDC did it for the Travelers Health Department and to talk about health and travel and safety during the summer travel season. What you're seeing on the right is a screenshot from a TikTok user who saw CDC's Instagram post, brought it to TikTok, and said that there's a Gen Z intern running the CDC Instagram page. There obviously isn't. It's the CDC team, and kudos to you if you're on the line. But what's so interesting about this is CDC can't be on TikTok, but because they created great content, that content made it to a channel that frankly is really important for them to be able to reach a younger demographic that's not necessarily getting a whole lot of credible health information. So I delivered on my promise. I talked very fast. That is everything I've got for you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to questions if anyone has any. I think Anisha's going to help me out with the Q&A because I've not been reading the chat.
Yes, there have been a lot of questions that have been rolling in, so thank you all. We'll try to answer as many as we can. Okay, Stacey, a couple of thoughts. One, I agree 100% with what you've shared here, but how do you cancel risk-averse clients, for example, nonprofits or government clients who are deciding to limit sort of time and investment in social media because of things like misinformation or lack of resources, et cetera?
Here's what I would say. Again, when you think about the whole presentation we just walked through, the bar for breaking through in social is really high. So there's a risk benefit, right? The benefit is your content gets seen. The risk, yes, there are risks around like being more progressive, or maybe some people might have a problem with your approach. But the bigger risk is that your content falls on deaf ears. And so what I always say is take baby steps. I said at the outset of the examples, it's not just about Taylor Swift, references or GIFs or memes. Sometimes it's just about thinking, all right, our content usually looks a certain way. Is that native for social? Can people read that? Is it going to be compelling enough for them to stop their scroll? It might just be up-leveling design to start. It might be testing, tapping a trend or intersecting with an interest and seeing what happens. But I think that, again, it's a matter of your content being relevant or not.
Thanks, Cece. Another question, is Threads popular?
Yes, I'm also realizing I should have presented longer so I didn't have to take so many questions at the end. I'm just kidding. Yeah, Threads is, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but like I said, the last time I looked at data, again, when Threads launched, you saw this massive rise of users, right? The last time I looked at the data, what you were seeing is like maybe a little bit of a drop off, but not that significant. I think what is going to supercharge Threads is two things. One, right now, discoverability is really hard. So on any other platform, I can search for a hashtag and find conversations that are relevant to me. For whatever reason, and unless this changed in the last week or two, you can't search for a hashtag on Threads. If you see a hashtag in a post in your feed, you can click on it and that will take you to relevant conversations, but you can't search. And so when you think about, all right, like I'm lazy, I follow all the people in conversations and my algorithm's all set up on other platforms. How am I going to find the conversations that are relevant to me here? I think that's a big barrier. I think also there's no paid advertising on Threads yet. And when brands can activate with paid and can target certain audiences, you're going to see a lot more brands shifting to that platform, because the reality right now is the alternative to Threads is X. And a lot of brands, and particularly public health organizations, are not doing any paid media on X. And we all know that organic reach has declined to the point where if you don't have paid media, it is incredibly difficult to get people to see your content.
So another question is just in terms of ideas that are on trend or capitalizing on something that's moving really quickly in social to a potential like boss or a supervisor who's really never heard of any of this. Any suggestions for how to sort of sell in those ideas internally?
I mean, look, I think that what I ask of my clients when we're doing social work is that they have to be on social too, right? So it's important that the people that are the, yay or nay on content are active on social and seeing what it's like in a social feed. I always pull examples and precedent. So chances are, if we're in health, we are not going to be like the first brand or organization to tap into a trend. So I'll pull examples. I'll look at previous examples of when organizations behaved this way and show them the comments and say, look, like these are actually more positive than what they usually get. You can see that on some of the CDC content, on the posts where they're tapping into interests and trends and doing things a little bit differently. Anecdotally, I see their comments are really positive and more positive than what you would typically see from CDC. They're facing a pretty big uphill battle with certain audiences on social. So I do think that there's some education and sort of baby steps to take.
Just on managing bad comments, do you have any guidance on how, organizations can manage those sorts of things when they come?
Look, I think that negative comments are a cost of entry in social, right? So you could try to chase down negative comments, but I don't know that it's going to do you much good. I think the obligation that we have in health and public health is to correct misinformation and disinformation. That's really hard for resource constrained organizations, right? Because if you get a post with 200 comments and you're posting all the time, it's really challenging to have the resources to read all of the comments, respond to everything in real time. It's another area, though, where AI is going to be immensely helpful. There are already tools that are incredible at scanning your comments, understanding what the intent and sentiment is of that content, pulling from a pre-approved bank of responses, and sending you an alert that says, hey, I'm 99% confident that this response needs to be sent with this, and you click approve. So as those become more available, I think that will really democratize the ability to respond to comments at scale.
Great. Some other questions. What are your thoughts on just copyright issues? I know some of the examples that you shared had implications of imagery that might be like widely circulated across the internet, but are there copyright implications? I think folks have had mixed experiences with that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not a copyright lawyer, so I'm going to tread very carefully here. I will say that a lot of the articles that I have read as a non-lawyer, and like I couldn't be any further from a lawyer. I work in communications. There is a fair usage element of you can use something if you're not sort of using it to sell a product or changing. I'm not going to explain it the right way, and there's 300 people on this call. Here's what I'm going to say. It is possible. There is no world in which any of these organizations I just showed you would be doing this if they were getting sued. But you should consult somebody that understands the law better than myself.
Great. Another question. How do you find and work with influencers to boost social or health campaigns?
Yeah, so there are the fancy ways to do it, right? Where there are platforms that you can work with that have hundreds, if not thousands, of influencers on their roster. So you could reach out to one of those platforms and say, look, I want, an influencer in Alzheimer's or, mental health. And they will give you a list of influencers and you contract through them. Oftentimes, resource constrained organizations don't really have the ability to work in that manner, and it typically tends to be a little bit more expensive. Sometimes the most effective way is to leverage hashtags and search for influencers yourself and reach out to them one-on-one. A lot of people on this call work in public health. So, if you're an influencer and you hear from Nike, you see dollar signs. If you're an influencer and you hear about an issue that you're incredibly passionate about and an important message that needs to be delivered, there is a good chance you're going to engage in a conversation.
Great. Another question. Do you have any insights about, can you talk a little bit more about LinkedIn and sort of how best to use it?
Yeah, LinkedIn is incredible for reaching professional audiences. Like there is no other platform that will do that any better. So if you need to reach researchers, scientists, healthcare professionals, you should be on LinkedIn. There's a lot of data that shows that healthcare professionals are on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, and they are. I showed you some examples of that. But typically, when they're consuming information on those platforms, they're doing it in what I call a blue jeans state, which is they're looking at pictures of their friends and entertainment, right? If you want to reach someone in a professional capacity, LinkedIn is the place to go. We're seeing LinkedIn is trying to shift more from like just a professional network into a little bit more of a consumer platform. Like for pharma, you can do branded DTC ads on LinkedIn now. They're also testing sort of video formats that are more similar to Reels that you would see on Instagram. But I would argue that like the number one use case for LinkedIn is professional audiences.
Great. Moving at the speed of social when we are in health, and sometimes it takes time to create content for our clients or get things approved. Any advice on how best to sort of navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one, like I said, you have to live and breathe in the platforms. So, if you're constantly on Instagram and you're following health related organizations and engaging with health content, you're going to start to see trends, and not just health content. You need to be following like mainstream, celebrities and pop culture. You're going to see it very early. I think that to me, there's like a little bit of grace for health organizations when it comes to a trend. So like very few people are expecting health organizations, particularly pharma and biotech, to see a trend and activate on it, within 24 or 48 hours. So I do find that with a lot of our clients, when, maybe we're the last to the table to tap a trend, it still does incredibly well. And so I think that you can move quickly. You're never going to be able to, I mean, maybe it's going to be hard to move as quickly as Oreos does. I mean, my favorite social example, I don't know if you guys remember a Super Bowl years ago, the power went out and within seconds, Oreo posted, "It's okay, you can still dunk in the dark." and it was a picture of an Oreo being dunked in a glass of milk. And that was incredible real-time social. We're never going to do that, right? But I do think that we can move fast enough for it to still be relevant.
Awesome. A couple questions have come in around just, a lot of these social trends are lighthearted, and how do we sort of communicate serious health or educational information without sort of turning it into a joke?
Look, yes, I showed you a lot of lighthearted examples. I think, though, that when you're talking about creating content like your audience does, that is not about just trends or memes or GIFs. That is just format. So when you think about, like, if you're on Instagram, the way that you see captions from real people, they put them in a certain format, right? You have that Instagram first sort of background behind the words. Yet in healthcare, we go and put up like professional captions that look like it was like a corporate video. It's things like that that I think you can create content in formats to talk about serious issues. I mean, look, the example I showed you, I believe it was from NAMI, this girl talking about her experience with self-harm. That is not a lighthearted topic, right? But she did it in such an authentic way to her that was the way that people are creating and consuming content. So I think it is possible. The other thing I would say, we just did our own, every year Booth Health does a research study called Chosen Circles, where we dig into how certain populations consume information and make health decisions. And when we release our data, we release data focused on underserved populations because we're very focused on health equity. So we just released one about Hispanic Latino Americans. But when you look at the broader data of all Americans, the majority of Americans say that they want health information to be entertaining. So there is data to show that there's room for that. But I think it's like, which topics do you do it for and when you need to use judgment?
This is a fun one. What do you think about organizations staying on X amidst all of the sort of changes and instability that are happening there?
Oh God, you say fun, I say dangerous for me to answer. Um, if I look, putting my personal opinions aside about Elon Musk or X or anything like that, I think that despite everything that's happening on X, there's still a massive audience there. And an audience that relies on that platform for information, whether that's a good thing or not. And so, to me, as a health organization or brand, you can either remove yourself from that conversation and then they're not getting credible information, or you can be there. And I think there is an imperative to be there with credible health information. I don't counsel anyone to support them financially and use paid media. I think that there are massive risks. And I think that you've seen the majority of brands pull back. And to me, that feels like the right thing to do. But organic content, when you look at their user numbers, they're down a little bit, but not enough to say we don't need to be there. And so I think that as if we were to put our personal opinions aside, if a critical audience is getting their information there, we probably have an obligation to deliver credible information. But I could argue it both ways, right? And that's a sensitive topic.
There have been a couple questions just from folks on the phone who are sort of in a limited resource setting. There maybe isn't so much capacity to develop like significant social media content like the things that you've been showing. Can you share some advice on just how you would recommend folks approach that?
Yeah, I mean, look, like one of the most effective ways that we've done content for our clients that don't have like big production budgets is we leverage their team and iPhones, right? Or Samsung Galaxy, whatever your poison is. We'll often go, to somebody's offices for a half day and we'll find employees and we'll film them in really socially native ways and we'll use them as messengers to tell stories. And doing that gives you humanity to your content, right? It's better than if you took the time to design, a static image for Instagram. It also allows you to tap into trends really well in an easy way. So for example, I'm sure some of you have heard of, and I always get the number wrong, but I think it's Vogue's, is it 70 questions, 72 questions? anyway, Vogue does a thing where they ask celebrities rapid fire 70 some odd questions. And it's a really popular mechanism. The National Human Genome Research Institute did that with their director. And so you can imagine that cost them next to no money, right? They got an iPhone and they followed him around and asked him a litany of questions, but it was a really human way for him to humanize what they as an organization do.
Awesome. Putting on your futurist hat, what trends as health communicators should we be paying attention to over the next decade in social, obviously?
There's so many. Look, I think that AI is obviously like all that anybody is talking about. I think that when we talk about AI, we often talk about the dangers of it, and I don't want to understate those. Like those are massive and significant. But I do think there's tremendous power in AI for good, particularly in health. That example I gave you of the HHS campaign is a good one, talking about how do we moderate comments using AI to correct misinformation and disinformation. How do we create content when we don't have resources and we need to create compelling content? I think there are a lot of really valuable use cases, and I think that health organizations are going to get there, while at the same time recognizing that we have to be aware of the dangers. You know, we're talking a lot in the last year about like deep fakes, right? So AI generated videos that are going to taint the election. When Biden was still in the election, what some people started talking about, they were calling it sort of like mild fakes or mid fakes, which is, imagine if you think about the dialogue about Biden at that time, imagine taking a video of him and just using AI to just make him look 1 to 2 years older. So imperceptible to the common eye, but by doing that, there's so much danger in sort of like exacerbating this, you know, issue with him as a candidate. So I think that we're going to see a lot about the dangers, but I also would hope that we're going to see a lot of the positives that will help us get our health messages out to more people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stacey. That is all of the questions that we have time for today. So thank you all so much. I am going to hand it over to Stacey Robeson, but before I do, I'm just going to include our MBooth Health website and the LinkedIn's for Stacey and I. If you all want to connect with us, please feel free to drop us a line. We'd love to partner and hear from some of you on the line. So thank you so much.
Thank you all, and I apologize for the dogs, but they behaved the rest of the time, which is a miracle.
Thank you. Huge thank you to Stacey and Anisha. This was awesome. Really, really engaging presentation. And I can tell from all of the questions and the chat that people are super into it. So I just want to say a big thank you to MBooth Health for sponsoring the webinar and for speaking. And also a huge shout out to all of our Society for Health Communication organizational members, our steering committee, our individual members. And if you are joining us today and you are not a member of the Society for Health Communication, I hope you will consider joining. You can do so on our website. And speaking of social, here is how you can engage with us on social. We would love to hear from you. And finally, I know a lot of people are asking, so we will be posting a recording of today's webinar on the Society website in the coming weeks. So you can find it there. You can find us on social. And again, thank you so much to MBooth Health and to Stacey and Anisha. This was a really awesome webinar. And thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you all at our next webinar.